The reason that I'm sitting down and making this video today is because many people have been urging me over Facebook and Instagram to actually sit down and make more YouTube videos. And without those people urging me to make videos, I probably wouldn't be able to do it because it's really hard to get myself to sit down and actually make a video. And it's even harder for me to think of ideas on what I want to talk about because there are a billion tutorials on YouTube, how to do this in witchcraft, how to do this for Wiccans, how to cast a spell, how to set up your altar. Most of it is bad information, but there's lots of information. So all of these comments have really helped motivate me, and I'm hoping that people will continue to message me and bug me and tell me to make more videos because I need that encouragement to actually do it. So this one, I'm going to make the title, I'm not a pagan, I'm not a Wiccan, I'm just a witch. And a lot of people think that to be a witch, all you have to do is cast spells, and witchcraft is the practice of casting spells. First off, before we get into it, I want to erase that terminology and explain to you my terminology of the word witchcraft. So there's a little bit of a disagreement. Historically, witchcraft is a European phenomenon that had to do with people meeting in the woods at night, flying to the Sabbath on a broomstick, meeting with the devil, trampling the cross, possibly killing babies, doing all sorts of heretical things that were considered evil. And half of it is, of course, paranoia, but there is more to the idea of the historical witches' Sabbath, which has been proved by people like Carlo Ginzburg in his book Ecstasies, Deciphering the Witches' Sabbath, some of his other books, where he finds that the root of witchcraft beliefs in Europe historically comes from shamanism and beliefs from shamanism, and there is actual evidence that he's pointed out to show that the idea of flying to the Sabbath at night on a broomstick comes from trance journeys, shamanism, many different elements that combined to create that archetype of the witch. That's in Europe, that's historical, that's what the witch trials, the persecutions were based around, this image of the witch as flying to the Sabbath, meeting with the devil, and doing all of these crazy things. So that's a very specific archetype. That's the Halloween archetype. That's the archetype of the new The Witch movie. That type of witch character. Historically, that is what defines a witch. Most people today, well, maybe not most people, but it's become kind of a popular thing to use the anthropology's definition of witchcraft, I hate when that happens. The anthropological definition of witchcraft came about, I think in the mid 20th century, and caught on more so in the 80s, that witchcraft was any type of hysteria in the world that had to do with people believing that harmful magic or curses were being thrown around. So that could apply to Africa, that could apply to South America. That could apply to anywhere in the world where this type of hysteria centering around the supernatural happened. Anthropology would define that as witchcraft and a witch hysteria, and those people accused of causing harm through magic. Those people would be called by anthropology witches. So the anthropological definition, witchcraft is any type of harmful magic. That is a completely different thing than the historical definition, which says that witchcraft is witches flying to the Sabbath, meeting with the devil, casting spells, doing all these different harmful things, poisoning the town's water supply, etc. So already there's a conflict there between these two definitions. So a lot of people today... Okay, let me go off of that and say that the modern religions of witchcraft, as started by Gerald Gardner and his covens, that's where it got popular from. Those covens were founded on the definition of historic witchcraft, not anthropological, historic. Gerald Gardner was kind of an amateur historian. He ran the Witchcraft Museum. He knew all of the history. Gerald Gardner's religion of witchcraft is historic. Pretty much everything that's in his practice, even down to the scourging, the nudity, the eating cakes and wine, the athame, dancing in a circle, the broomstick, the cauldron, initiation rites, the making of an ointment to anoint certain parts of the body. Pretty much everything in his religion of witchcraft has a parallel to historical practices or historical descriptions. So if you attempt to apply this cosmology of history's version of witchcraft and history's definition of witchcraft to Africa, it doesn't make a lot of sense because it's completely different cultures, even completely different languages. So to me, to apply an English or a European word to a different part of the world like Africa, where they probably have their own words to describe harmful magic, is completely inappropriate. That's where a lot of this conflict goes on around the word witchcraft. If you look at witchcraft in the historical version, it's easy to see that people practicing a religion today has somehow to do with the history of witchcraft and the word witchcraft. If you apply the anthropological definition of witchcraft being a type of magic, things start to fall apart because to say that witchcraft is only magic, that negates all of the rituals and tools and traditions, which is why it's very popular today to call Gerald Gardner's traditions and all that spawned off of his tradition of Gardnerian witchcraft, it's easy to call them Wicca, W-I-C-C-A. This is something that not a lot of people know. It's said over and over again that Gerald Gardner called his religion Wicca. In fact, that's completely untrue. Gerald Gardner called his religion witchcraft. The adherents could sometimes be called Wicca, W-I-C-A, but the religion was always witchcraft, and the adherents could be called witches, and most of the time they were. If you read any book prior to the 80s, even a little back to the 70s, all of the books from Gardnerian, Alexandrian Wiccans, as they would be called today, they call themselves witches. They call their religion witchcraft. And if you look at the historical definition of witchcraft, that's entirely appropriate, because everything they were doing, everything they continue to do, has, for the most part, a parallel in history based on witches and the archetype of witches and the perceived practice of witches. If you transplanted a group of Gardnerian Wiccans back into the times of the witch persecutions and someone stumbled upon one of their rituals, they would easily say, those are witches, this is a witch's Sabbath. The horned god, the goddess, all of it has parallels. So it is entirely appropriate to call Gerald Gardner's religion, which is everything that's descended from it or been inspired from it, it's easy to call them witches. It's entirely appropriate to call them witches of witchcraft. But today it's very popular to call it Wicca, even among traditionalists, when in fact Alex Sanders, Gerald Gardner, Maxine Sanders, still today, all called it witchcraft. They all called their religion witchcraft, and they were proud of that. So how did this religion, called witchcraft by its adherents and its priests, come to be known as Wicca today? To be honest, there was kind of a name change. At the beginning, people who weren't very fond of Gardnerian witches, of Gardnerian witchcraft, or the British traditionalists as they're called today, all of the people who practiced the practices set down by Gerald Gardner, people started to call them Wiccans. And it may have been it was fellow witches who were not Gardnerians and they didn't like what they were doing, or they were jealous of how widespread it was becoming. Either way, it arose as a derogatory term. It was kind of to say that witchcraft was a noble and powerful thing that they wanted. And since Gardnerians weren't doing it the right way, they weren't witches, they were Wiccans, and their religion was Wicca. And somehow later on in the 80s and the 90s particularly, the term witchcraft began to be replaced with Wicca. And it's important to note that this was around the time when the Satanic Panic was happening. People thought that witchcraft and witches were evil. And then they looked back on Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, and he called his adherents witches. For some reason, even though there was already a religion of people calling themselves witches, he decided to jump on the bandwagon. And that kind of complicated things, because these people who had known themselves as witches in a religion of witchcraft, with many books published about the religion using the words witchcraft for the religion, now people were viewing them as evil like they had been for a long time. But now it was backed up by Anton LaVey's writings, and it was backed up furthermore by all of the news reports and all of the hysteria going on around the word witch, around the words witchcraft. It became very politically incorrect, even more so than it ever had been in the past, to use the words witch and witchcraft. Because now there was evidence in the news, there was evidence in Anton LaVey's books, that witches were Satanists, and according to the hysterical news, that they were killing people. So what better time than to stop using the word witchcraft and witch and start using the more politically correct terms, Wicca and Wiccan. So the words Wicca and Wiccan had been around for a while, and they started from a derogatory term. they slowly began to be adopted, and then soon it became almost necessary to describe yourself as that to the general public, to describe yourself as Wiccan rather than a witch of witchcraft. So then we get books from Llewellyn. We get Scott Cunningham's Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner, one of probably, in my opinion, one of the most influential books for the neo-Wiccan movement. And I don't mean that in an offensive way, I just mean the movement of Gardnerian-spawned witchcraft that doesn't stick to traditions. I use neo-Wicca to kind of divide traditional from newer practices. Scott Cunningham publishes his book, Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner. Llewellyn continues to publish books to this day, almost all using Wicca, almost all describing neo-Wiccan or newer styles of Wiccan practices, and this happens to be the most popular publisher of occult, metaphysical, and New Age books. So, right now, in this climate, Wicca has replaced witchcraft in terms of the majority of people. So now people say to me all the time, I have a friend who's Wiccan too, like you. Oh, are you Wiccan? I didn't know you were Wiccan. Basically assuming that I'm Wiccan. And I usually don't take any offense to it because I see the evolution of the term, why that term is so popular today, why it continues to be so popular. The only thing that I have to say is I'm not Wiccan. My religion is not Wicca, and my religion is witchcraft. I'm a witch. And just because my practice is very similar to what a Gardnerian or an Alexandrian would do, or any of the traditionalists that are very similar to them, who use 3 initiations, who cast a circle using 4 watchtowers, who have the horned god and the goddess, and who have a cycle of 8 sabbats, 4 greater, 4 lesser, who use a scourge in their practice, who use an athame in their practice, who use the traditional consecrations, who use the 5-fold kiss. All of these different things that are kind of trademarks of the traditionalists that you won't find very much in the less traditional. Just because I do that does not make me a Wiccan. I brought this question up to people on Facebook groups of traditionalists. Why is it so popular today, although your elders use the words witchcraft and witch, like Maxine Sanders? I've never even heard Maxine Sanders or seen her type the word Wicca. She always says the craft, she always says witchcraft. So I asked these Alexandrians what they thought. I said something like, shouldn't we have the right to use the word witch? Shouldn't we feel free to use the word witchcraft? I got a few people agreeing with me. Soon after that, and I'm not saying it was influenced by me, I think it's influenced by a lot of things going on right now within the witchcraft community. The name of the page was changed from something like Wicca was in the title. The name of the page was changed to Witchcraft now. And I think I hope that is something that will grow, because I think connecting to the word used most popularly in the past, the word used at the beginning, is the best way to help us discover what we were originally meant to be. We were originally meant to be witches, not Wiccans. We were originally meant to practice witchcraft, not Wicca. And if people want to use those words, that's completely fine. But the people that I learn from through their books, writings, interviews, things that they've said, their traditions and beliefs, they predominantly used the words witchcraft. And I relate to that. So, I'm not a Wiccan. My second point is, I'm not a pagan. It's also said very popularly that Wicca is a pagan religion, pagan with a capital P, because lowercase p means pre-Christian people and religions. Uppercase P means basically neo-pagan, or it helps differentiate kind of dead religions from living religions. And it doesn't always work perfectly, but that's the general consensus that all of the newer pagan religions, the modern pagan religions, are pagan with a capital P. I'm not a pagan, and it's because I don't attempt in any way to practice a religion which is pre-Christian. In fact, I believe that whenever Gerald Gardner's initiating coven, the coven before Gerald Gardner, whenever that formed, it could have been formed a year before he found them, it could have been formed 10 years, 50 years, generations before, who knows, we don't have enough evidence. People like, I believe, Philip Heselton believes that there was a coven that initiated him. I believe he has evidence for that. He's written about it. He's one of the biggest historians and biographers in the craft. He is a reliable source, and he is saying now that he believes Gerald Gardner was initiated, so get that out of the way. Gerald Gardner was most likely initiated into a coven. The only thing we don't know is when that coven was formed. It could have been very new, it could have been old. We have no idea. Whenever it was formed, I am not placing any of my betting money, so to speak, on it being pre-Christian. If it was pre-Christian, that wouldn't matter, because either way, it is a mystery religion which works, which connects me to the mysteries, which connects many other thousands of people to the mysteries, and helps us learn and be better people and grow within our lives and within the craft. I don't seek to be pre-Christian. I don't seek to be a pagan. I don't relate to almost everything that I have heard from people who claim to be pagans. I don't relate to that in any way. And I don't believe that witchcraft, as it is today, is pagan. I don't see any evidence for it. I believe that a lot of its elements are very old, back to early modern to medieval times, but I won't claim that any of it was actually before Christianity came to Europe. So the word pagan is not important to me. I don't define myself as pagan, and I don't define myself as a Wiccan. I am a witch. I practice witchcraft, and I'm very happy with those words. That is the very source of what I like to describe myself with in words. That's what the history is based upon. That's where the roots are, and that's what I feel comfortable calling myself. No amount of Llewellyn publications will change that. People have been calling themselves witches of witchcraft since the 40s, 50s, and onward. And I don't see any reason why we should change that if we are doing something which at least resembles the witches of history. I don't see any reason why someone who practices magic should be called a witch just because anthropology says so, because the very definition of anthropology as applied to modern magical practitioners is almost always flawed, because the only way anthropology's definition would work is if you are doing harmful magic. And if you do any other magic that's beneficial, is it not truly witchcraft because it doesn't fit into anthropology's definition? It works for anthropology in a way, but it doesn't apply to history before the 20th century, and it doesn't fit in very well with modern religions and even modern practices of witchcraft or magic. So I call magic magic. I call spellcasting spellcasting. There's no reason to call it witchcraft. The only time I call something witchcraft is if it resembles the archetype of the witch's Sabbath and of the witches of history, if it has a historical basis. And most religions that call themselves witchcraft today do seek to reconnect with the archetype of the witch of the past. And so I think it's perfectly fine to call them witchcraft. If you're just practicing magic, if you're just practicing spells, and that's it, I don't believe you're practicing witchcraft. You're just practicing magic and you're casting spells. So I believe truly that witchcraft is, if not a religion, something which is inspired by the past. I don't believe that something that isn't inspired by the past or is just spellcasting, I don't believe that that's witchcraft. So I am a witch because my religion is witchcraft, not because I practice magic. I'm not a pagan because I don't seek to connect to pre-Christian religion. I'm happy with my religion as it is, and I don't feel like it needs to be before Christianity. In fact, I believe that there are many elements of it which have almost surely been influenced by Christianity, and it's not tainted because of that. It's not purer, it's not more pure somehow because it's before Christianity. So I hope I cleared up some of the terms that I use for myself, why most of my videos use the words witchcraft and witch instead of Wicca, why I generally won't consider myself a pagan, and if you call me a pagan, I'll say I'm not a pagan. So I do think it's wrong to assume that all witches are pagans, or all Wiccans are pagans. I'd like to encourage people to use the words for their practice that they feel inspired by, but I'd also like people to look into the histories of those words and think critically about using them. If you guys have any suggestions on videos I can make, things I can talk about, questions you have for me, feel free to comment below, because I'm hoping that I can devote to making more videos, and I definitely need the extra help to get me to do so.